I'm going to call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology and welcome our witnesses here today. We appreciate the work that you've put into your testimony and the thoughtfulness behind it, and we look forward to hearing from you. When the government spends other people's money, it has an ongoing obligation to ask a fundamental question: has it spent the money wisely? After all, the people whose money it is spending might have preferred to do something different with it, especially in these tight economic times. And if the answer to the fundamental question of whether the money is being well spent is no, then the government must ask a second question: how should it fix the situation? Last year, the FCC spent $2.2 billion of other people's money on the Lifeline program. Specifically, it spent $2.2 billion of your money, my money, virtually every American's money, since the Lifeline program and the entire Universal Service Fund is paid for through a charge on phone bills. Carriers provide discounted service and collect the difference from the program. Some give away phones to gain the subscribers and the recurring revenue. But at the end of the day, it's still the same taxpaying people who bear the cost, since 96% of the country has phone service and see a fee on their bill. The fund has increased 266% since 2008 and grown almost six-fold since 1998. All while the cost of phone service has actually gone down. Despite the limit of one subsidized subscriber per household, published reports suggest some subscribers have 8 or more phones with subsidized service, with one woman saying that to get one, quote, she just goes across the street and gets it, close quote. One man has claimed to have a bag full of 20 phones on the program that he sells, quote, for about 10, 15, or 20 bucks, close quote, each. Our hearing today is to determine what can be done to curb these kinds of potential abuses. And it's not clear the money is even really helping low-income families. According to some reports, as many as 41% of those receiving Lifeline support either could not demonstrate eligibility for the subsidy or refused to respond to requests for certification. Moreover, 92% of low-income households have phone service, but only about 58% of those households participate in the program. So many low-income homes apparently obtain phone service without the subsidy. And despite spending $7 billion on the program over the last 5 years, the phone penetration rate among low-income households has only grown 2%, with only some of that growth likely attributable to the Lifeline program, since at least a third of low-income phone households don't use the subsidy. There may be a number of ways to interpret these data and other data, but it certainly does not paint a picture of success. So as far as the first fundamental question goes, there is near unanimity among the FCC, both parties of Congress, and almost anyone familiar with the program that Lifeline Fund has been fraught with waste, fraud, and abuse, and that the money has not been spent as wisely as it should have been. Now, there's more than enough blame to go around. The path we have found ourselves on was paved by many people, presumably with the best intentions. But it does not change the fact that we're spending large sums of money and probably squandering much of it. Which brings us to the second question, which is how to fix the situation. Now, Senators McCaskill and Coburn say eliminate the program. And indeed, as recently as last month, Senator McCaskill concluded, and I quote, that there's just no reason this program should continue given its history of extensive waste and abuse, close quote. Senator Pryor and Congressman Griffin say exclude wireless providers from the program. Congresswoman Matsui, ranking members Waxman and Eshoo, and a number of their colleagues say expand it to broadband. Whatever we do, staying on the present course seems out of the question. To the FCC's credit, the agency has embarked on a number of reforms since 2011. For example, to ensure only eligible households participate and to combat duplicative subsidies to a single household or even a single user, the FCC is moving forward with beefed-up certification processes and creation of eligibility and duplication databases. It's also imposed independent audit requirements on carriers receiving more than $5 million a year in Lifeline funding. The FCC says its efforts will save $2 billion over the next 3 years, but are the steps the Commission is taking enough? With only a 58% penetration rate, the fund may still continue to grow, especially if it's expanded to cover broadband. Should the program be eliminated? If not, should a freeze be put in place until reforms are complete? Should the program be placed under a cap or budget? I note that the 2012 FCC reform order suggested the agency would establish a budget by early 2013. But disappointingly, I see no mention of such a budget in today's FCC testimony. Should subscriber co-payments be required? Should the program be moved to a voucher system so that the subsidy goes directly to the user rather than through a carrier? Should the FCC consider the waivers allowing participation by non-facility-based carriers? These are among a host of questions that many in industry, in the press, in Congress, and the public are asking, and they're among the many issues that we hope to examine with today's hearing. So I thank the witnesses for being here. Your testimony and expertise are welcome, and we look forward to your ideas about this program gone awry. With that, I yield back the balance of my time and recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for agreeing with our request, the Democrats' request, to hold this morning's hearing on the Universal Service Fund's low-income program known as Lifeline. Started nearly 30 years ago under the Reagan administration, the Lifeline program advances an important public policy goal of ensuring affordable monthly telephone service for tens of millions of low-income Americans. The program, as you know, was expanded to include wireless service during the Bush administration, and on our side, we have consistently not only pursued the efficacy of the program, but worked to weed out any problems with it. So we appreciate the fact that you would have this hearing this morning to examine it. Now, while most of us take basic phone service for granted, for many Americans, including seniors, veterans, and the disabled who are unable to work or are temporarily unemployed, Lifeline support can be the only means for regularly staying in touch with a doctor, applying for a job, or contacting 911 during an emergency. Oversight hearings will ensure the Lifeline program is achieving its intended goals and doing so without waste, fraud, or abuse. Thanks to the reform measures implemented under FCC Chairman Janikowski, the Commission expects to save more than $2 billion through 2014. These savings have come through common sense reforms such as scrubbing subscriber rolls of duplicates, requiring proof of eligibility, and de-enrolling subscribers who are not actually using the service. As we look toward the future, the FCC and states must continue to take corrective action as soon as problems are identified. The timely implementation of a national database to ensure program eligibility and prevent duplication must be a top priority. I commend Congresswoman Matsui for her steadfast commitment to a 21st century Lifeline program. In order to compete in today's economy, every American needs high-speed access to the internet, whether to apply for jobs or receive health care or education. We know this. This is a given fact. The Broadband Affordability Act, introduced earlier this week, creates a permanent program for Lifeline support for broadband, while directing the FCC to ensure accountability for carriers participating in the program. So I want to thank each of our witnesses for the important testimony that you will offer today, the important answers to the important questions that are going to be asked of you, and for your steadfast commitment to strengthen the Lifeline program. I now yield the balance of my time to Congresswoman Matsui of California.
Thank you, Ranking Member Eshoo, for yielding me time, and I'd also like to welcome our witnesses here today. It is my hope that this hearing focuses on the facts about the Lifeline program and not the fiction. Up until recently, Lifeline has enjoyed bipartisan support. Lifeline was created by President Reagan and expanded for wireless service by President Bush. Lifeline provides a benefit to many of America's disabled veterans, seniors, tribal areas, and families on Head Start and a school lunch program. In my district of Sacramento, nearly 30,000 of my constituents participate in Lifeline, 17,000 of whom are seniors on fixed income. The Lifeline program must be reformed and modernized in a responsible manner, and it must account for the internet and innovation economy. Nearly 100 million Americans still have not adopted broadband, which is only more concerning given more than 80% of available jobs in this country now require online applications. To help address the digital divide, along with Ranking Members Waxman and Eshoo, I introduced the Broadband Adoption Act to allow eligible Americans in rural and urban areas to use Lifeline for broadband services. The bill also requires the FCC to implement a national eligibility database to ensure one Lifeline per eligible household. This will prevent the growth of the Lifeline Fund in a responsible manner while ensuring Lifeline is eligible for the millions of Americans who need it. We need to reform and modernize Lifeline, not eliminate it. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. We now recognize the Vice Chair of the full committee, the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to welcome all of our witnesses. We are pleased that you are here because this is a program that we're hearing quite a bit about. The Lifeline program, you know, it was started with good intentions. And bear in mind, now it is a $2.2 billion expense. When it started in 1984, it was a $380 million program. So this is the kind of explosive growth that this program has seen, and it's why so many of our constituents are questioning the program and are questioning the use of Obama phones, as they are commonly called. And I think that what it has come to be is more or less a symbol of the mismanagement, not only within this program, but with the entire USF and the FCC's budget. So there are plenty of questions that are springing up around this. What you're going to hear us focus on is accountability. You know, this is an administration that said, we want to be transparent, we want to be accountable, we want to be the best at that. And we're repeatedly shown mismanagement and lack of transparency and a shuttling, if you will, of accountabilities. And so we do look forward to reviewing this. Should it be reauthorized? Should it be wound down? Should it be eliminated? How do we hold it accountable? What reforms should go into place if it is allowed to stay? I think if it were up for sunset today, that many in this Congress would view and vote to take it down because of the mismanagement that is there. I think that also the qualifications for individuals that are enrolled in the program, making certain that there is vetting and verification done for the individuals that are enrolled in that program. Also, questions that you get are the ones that are receiving the phones, are they obligated to use those phones on the networks, the carriers from whom they've received the phone, or can they unlock their subsidized phone and go onto their own private networks? I even had one constituent, after it came out that the bombing, the terrorists that committed the bombings in Boston were receiving welfare benefits. Were they in this program? I think those are the kind of questions that our constituents are asking, and we turn to you to be able to get those answers and to look for the way to reform and to hold this program accountable. I thank you so much for your time, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Recognize the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Latta, for the remaining time.
I thank the Chairman for yielding the time, and I also appreciate you holding this hearing today, and I thank our distinguished panel of witnesses for testifying today. Unfortunately, waste, fraud, and abuse are words too often associated with government programs. While the Universal Service Fund Lifeline program serves an important purpose in connecting low-income Americans, the tripling of the program from 2009 to 2012, and all the too frequent stories of abuse of the program are cause for the concern. I do commend the FCC for the reforms adopted in 2012. However, I have concerns that the program is still on an unsustainable path. I look forward to hearing more about the implementation of the Commission's reforms and if additional actions need to be taken. Since all Americans are vested in the program through a surcharge on their phone bill or through participation in Lifeline. Our discussion here today is significant not just for this subcommittee, but for all Americans across the country. And I thank the chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Anyone else on the Republican side want the remaining 56 seconds? If not, all times yield back on our side. We'll turn now to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last month, I joined with my colleagues, Representative Eshoo and DeGette, to call for a hearing on Lifeline. We asked for a hearing because we believe bipartisan oversight can strengthen this important program, and I thank Chairman Walden for agreeing to hold this hearing. We have a national commitment to ensure every American has access to the communications services they need to fully participate in our economy and democracy. The $8 billion spent annually by the FCC's Universal Service Fund is supposed to advance that goal. But because USF is ultimately paid for by consumers, we must demand accountability to ensure the funds are spent responsibly. Since its beginning during the Reagan administration, Lifeline has helped millions of Americans living in poverty get home phone service. Without this assistance, these families would not be able to call for help in emergencies or participate in our economy. In advance of today's hearing, we heard from victims of domestic violence, homeless veterans, and families caring for children with disabilities that this relatively small subsidy has a big impact in keeping them connected. Regrettably, some have made up myths about the program to score political points. Here are the facts. President Obama did not create a Lifeline. The government does not give away free cell phones or iPads. Nowhere in America except in Tennessee do they call it an Obama phone. And eliminating the Lifeline program or disqualifying wireless services would not reduce our nation's budget deficit by a single penny. Under Chairman Janikowski, the FCC has improved efficiency and curbed incentives for waste, fraud, and abuse across all 4 USF programs. For Lifeline, the FCC has instituted tough measures that require consumers to demonstrate that they are eligible for benefits before they can sign up. As a result of these reforms, the size of the Lifeline program is declining. That progress must continue, and the Commission should remain open to additional proposals that could enhance accountability. We should also continue to modernize the program to meet the 21st century communications needs of low-income Americans. That's why I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of the Broadband Adoption Act introduced by Representative Matsui. The bill would allow eligible low-income households to apply the Lifeline support towards broadband services. It also directs the FCC to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse and does not add a single new household to the program. But our oversight shouldn't just stop with Lifeline. Since 1998, the High Cost Fund has distributed over $51 billion to rural telecom carriers, nearly 4 times as much as the low-income program. I believe strongly that Americans in rural areas of our nation need access to communications services just as much as my constituents in LA, but there are certainly equal, if not greater, incentives for waste, fraud, and abuse in the High Cost Fund. Under Lifeline, the phone companies get $9.25 per month of Lifeline support per household. But until recently, the High Cost Fund paid some carriers thousands of dollars per month per household. Although the FCC has taken positive steps to reduce these enormous high-cost fund subsidies, many phone companies still receive hundreds of dollars per month per household. And unlike the Lifeline program, one high-cost household can have multiple subsidized lines. A low-income family of 5 in Los Angeles is allowed one Lifeline phone to share as an economic unit. In contrast, a high-cost household in Arkansas is eligible to have multiple subsidized lines going to one address. The low-income family is eligible for a discount of $9 per month, while the household in Arkansas is eligible for subsidies up to $250 per line, with no limit on the number of subsidized lines. And the Arkansas subsidy is available regardless of household wealth. Now, I'm not opposed to oversight of the Lifeline program. In fact, I was one of the members who requested this hearing. But I am opposed to those who want to turn this into a partisan issue or to pick on subsidies to low-income families while ignoring the even larger subsidies their constituents receive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Gentleman's time's expired. We'll now go to hear from our witnesses. And first up is Julie Veach, who's the chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Federal Communications Commission. Ms. Veach, we're delighted to have you here. Please pull that microphone pretty close to you, uncomfortably close. Turn the button on, and you're set to go.
Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. And thank you for the opportunity to address the FCC's reforms to the Lifeline program. For more than 25 years, the Lifeline program has helped ensure that the neediest among us have access to basic telephone service, a gateway to finding a job, accessing health care, connecting with family, and calling for help in an emergency. The program was originally designed for old-fashioned wireline phone service. In the 2000s, as consumers increasingly adopted wireless services, the program adapted to support wireless service for low-income families. But adequate protections were not put in place, and the Lifeline program became a target for waste and abuse. Seeing the facts, in 2009, the Commission started overhauling the program to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, and to modernize it to meet the communications needs of low-income Americans. Building on recommendations from the Joint Board on Universal Service, in 2011, the FCC initiated comprehensive Lifeline reforms. The reforms are expected to produce $2 billion in savings through the end of 2014. In addition, for the first time, the Commission adopted clear goals for the program, ensuring the availability of voice and broadband services for low-income Americans and minimizing the burden on the consumers and businesses who pay for it. Let me walk you through the major reforms. First, the Commission took steps to ensure that only one eligible consumer per household participates in the program. Our rules now require that low-income consumers prove eligibility at the time of enrollment. We are working closely with states and other federal agencies to automate this process. The FCC also put in place an annual recertification requirement to ensure that only eligible subscribers remain in the program. This reform alone is projected to save $400 million in 2013. We've also been working since 2010 to eliminate duplicative Lifeline support. Through targeted data reviews, we have eliminated 1.5 million duplicate subscriptions, saving $180 million a year. In addition, the National Lifeline Accountability Database, which will be operational by the end of the year, will permanently detect and prevent duplicative support. The FCC took several other steps. We eliminated link-up support to providers offering service on non-tribal lands, support originally intended to defray the cost of dispatching a technician. This reform resulted in savings of over $93 million last year. The FCC also adopted new oversight and auditing requirements, and we are actively enforcing our rules. Recently, the FCC's Enforcement Bureau pursued cases against 2 providers that resulted in an enforcement action over $1 million and issued nearly 200 warnings to individuals, notifying them that they violated the program rules. Finally, using savings from the reforms, we launched a broadband pilot that will provide critical data as the Commission considers how best to ensure that low-income Americans have access to broadband, which is becoming essential to access jobs, education, and economic opportunity. Before closing, I'd like to emphasize the critical role of our state partners. Under the Communications Act, states designate the providers to participate in the Lifeline program, including in most cases wireless providers. In addition, states can operate as laboratories for reform, by adopting rules and safeguards that go beyond the FCC's baseline, and by using their own systems to detect and eliminate duplicative support. In closing, I wish to emphasize that access to phone service increases access to jobs, medical care, and social services, things that can lift consumers out of poverty. We look forward to continuing to work with you, our state partners, other federal agencies, industry, consumer groups, and the low-income community to ensure that our program is disciplined and effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Veach. We appreciate your testimony and the work at the FCC. We'll now go to Mr. Philip Jones, Chairman of the Board and President of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. We appreciate not only your testimony, but the response to our letter as well, where we sought your input and that of your members across the country. So, Mr. Jones, thank you, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Walden. Good morning, members of the committee, Ranking Member Eshoo. I'm pleased to testify today on the Federal Lifeline program. I am a commissioner of the Washington State Utilities and Transportation Commission, and also, as the chairman noted, president of NARUC. We are a group that represents public utility commissions around the country, 50, plus the District of Columbia, plus certain territories. Over 200 commissioners and 8,000 staff are regulating, hopefully with humility, in the public interest. And we take this responsibility, as Ms. Veach said, seriously. This is a valuable program. It has been operated under a federalist construct for 3 decades. It's bipartisan, but we recognize the need for more accountability today. And as we said in our letter to you last Friday, Chairman Walden, we tried to answer your questions on accountability. And we did a survey. We got 30 responses. Just let me say a few things about background on this. When this program was created in 1985 after the breakup of AT&T, the program applied only to landline service, and the opportunity for abuse was limited under the old AT&T system. There was little competition in the marketplace. Wireless was not available. Cable VoIP was not available. But in 2005, the FCC broadened the program by making discounts available, as Ms. Veach noted, to non-facilities-based carriers. These are resellers of equipment and networks offered by the wireline folks. These new entrants, led by a company called TracFone, developed business plans, for-profit business plans, providing not only low-income consumers with free cell phones and free minutes, but generating healthy profits. Nothing wrong with that. It was just new. Such plans were not possible or even heard of in 1985 or 1996. What happened? Explosive growth. Explosive growth in the low-income fund. In November of 2009, NARUC called for improved verification practices to overhaul a system grounded in self-certification. This program is grounded in self-certification. Yes, under the penalty of perjury, but it's basically self-certification. Many NARUC members had issues with that, Mr. Chairman, right from the start, me included. But the FCC chose not to deal with it then. And we have kind of the problem that we have today. As the FCC, however, continues to work on databases to eliminate duplicate support and verify eligibility, some states moved ahead. Ranking Member Eshoo and Congresswoman Matsui, your state of California has been a leader in this regard. 2006, they started a new program on verification. You may disagree because 500,000 people were de-enrolled, but they really stepped up to the plate even before the FCC acted. So there are 5 states now that have opted out of the FCC's program. Vermont is included, Representative Welch, and California have opted out of this new order last year. And at least 11 state social service databases are being used to confirm consumer eligibility at the front end, including my state of Washington. More states are considering establishing such databases, but the cost can be prohibitive, and the expectation of federal databases may cause some states to avoid the cost of creating their own. I was pleased when the FCC took action on Lifeline in 2010. And let me commend the FCC for referring this to the Joint Board. The Joint Board process with the states was set up to deal with difficult technical issues like this. I note at the time Ray Baum served as a commissioner. He was very active on the Joint Board, and I think Ray would agree with me that the Joint Board process for Lifeline worked well. referred to the Joint Board, came back with a recommended decision within 6 months, record time. And then the FCC, as Julie said, the FCC acted on it. This is a textbook example of how the congressionally mandated Joint Board process should work. We have some results in the state of Washington. I won't dwell on those now. I can respond in questions, but about 37% with one carrier, 25% with another. They either didn't respond or they were de-enrolled last year. So this certification and recertification process does work. I have some questions about why people don't respond. I think there are some legitimate concerns about why these people don't respond. Maybe a homeless person without an address. It may not be addressed to the proper person. The carrier may not have the resources to follow up. And I think legitimate people who qualify at 135% of the federal poverty guidelines should get this service. So in closing, I think it's a valuable program. I commend Julie and the FCC staff. They worked hard on this. As I said, this is a shared responsibility. States, FCC, carriers, low-income groups. So I look forward to the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. We appreciate, again, the work of your organization and you personally. We'll now move to Ms. Jessica Gonzalez, who's the Vice President of Policy and Legal Affairs for the National Hispanic Media Coalition. And Ms. Gonzalez, we're delighted to have you here today. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Walden.
Go ahead and push that little button there. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Chairman Walden. Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the subcommittee, I'm Jessica Gonzalez of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. We're an organization, a nonprofit organization that scrutinizes telecommunications policies through the lens of how they impact Latinos and other people of color. The question posed by today's hearing is whether the Lifeline program is money well spent. I answer with a resounding yes. Lifeline has an important goal to ensure that all people have access to affordable communications. It is a treasured tool that achieves broad societal goals such as upward mobility. It positively and directly affects our economy, employment, healthcare, public safety, strong families, civic participation, and education. The idea that we as a country should remove barriers so that all people can access communications is not a new one. In fact, the concept dates back to the Postal Act of 1792. Lifeline's roots are in the Reagan FCC, which created Lifeline at the behest of a bipartisan group of congressmen and senators. In the Telecom Act of 1996, Congress further codified the concept by establishing the Universal Service Fund, stating that consumers in all regions of the nation, including low-income consumers and those in rural, insular, and high-cost areas, should have access to telecommunications and information services. And in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the Bush FCC used USF monies to support prepaid wireless service and ensure that those displaced by the storm would stay connected. Lifeline now provides phone service to more than 15 million people. Who are these people? According to one provider, most of them have an annual household income of less than $15,000 per year. Nearly a third are over the age of 55, and over a third are disabled. Stories in the media of corporate abuse for profit have drowned out the voices of the very real people that use Lifeline as a tool to improve their lives and move away from government assistance. I sit here before you this morning to tell their stories. The story of a disabled mother from Tennessee caring for a child with Down syndrome who said, "It gives me peace of mind to know that I can pick up the phone and call for help." The story of a veteran and double amputee who uses wireless Lifeline to coordinate doctor's appointments and communicate with family while away from home. A single father who was laid off but secured a job in just a few months with his Lifeline. A pediatrician in Boston who treats fragile children living in shelters, in public housing, and on the streets. She can monitor those children because of wireless Lifeline service. A mental health therapist in Baltimore who explained that Lifeline could have helped the day that one of her third grade clients attempted suicide at school. His mother had no phone and was difficult to reach that day. I think you get the picture. The vast majority of Lifeline recipients are grateful seniors, deserving veterans, and many folks who are going through the hardest times in their lives, facing job loss, illnesses, disability, and family tragedies. For these people, Lifeline literally lives up to its name and must continue. Speaking from personal experience, I used Lifeline about 10 years ago after being laid off from my teaching job. I subscribed for a very brief period of time, but the media isn't telling my story because it isn't sensational. I used Lifeline to enhance my education, and today I am an attorney. And I, like everyone else I know that has ever relied on a government service, was not flaunting it around town. In fact, if anything, I was embarrassed about it. I wanted to get off the assistance as soon as I could and never look back. And that's what I did until today, when I realized that voices like mine are going unheard to the detriment of this important program. So yes, Lifeline is money well spent. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
We appreciate your testimony, and we'll look forward to coming back with some questions, I'm sure, from all the panel members. We'll now go to Mr. Jeff Feist, who is the General Manager of the Montana Telecommunications Association. Mr. Feist, glad to have you here today as well. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure, and it's an honor to be invited to testify. Rural telecommunications providers are pleased to support the Lifeline program. We strongly endorse the principles of universal service, which are aimed at ensuring that all Americans have access to advanced communications services no matter where they live and regardless of their income. The Lifeline program not only is the law, it's good policy. The program has been successful in enabling low-income Americans to share in the many benefits of access to vital communications services. It is well known that the program has suffered from exponential growth in recent years. While other universal service program funding has been flat over the years, Lifeline support exploded from $800 million to $2.2 billion in just a few years, almost entirely because of a rapid influx of prepaid wireless providers into the program. The number of wireless Lifeline providers grew from 41 in 2004 to nearly 700 today. The contribution factor has grown commensurately because of what Senator McCaskill terms the wireless explosion. Continued growth of the Lifeline program threatens to jeopardize the integrity of the Universal Service Fund itself, including essential support for broadband investment in our nation's schools and libraries, rural health care facilities, and high-cost communities. The FCC last year took important steps to mitigate waste, fraud, and abuse that plagued the program by releasing the Lifeline Reform Order. The savings attained by the order are substantial. What would have been a $2.4 billion Lifeline demand at the end of 2012 was reduced to $2.2 billion, and the savings continue to come in. In fact, it appears that the Lifeline program funding may be less than $2 billion in 2013. But there's an end to these anticipated savings. While most of the savings from the reform order will have been achieved by the end of this year, there are many factors that threaten to put the program back on a growth path. For example, at least some portion of subscribers who were de-enrolled at the end of 2012 can be expected to re-enroll in 2013 because they neglected to recertify during the recertification period. Second, the eligibility base has been expanded substantially to include several new programs. In Montana, at least anecdotally, we're seeing considerable growth in subscribership as the result of this expanded eligibility. Third, if broadband access becomes a permanent part of the program, we can expect further growth in demand. Fourth, only about 55% of those consumers who are eligible for Lifeline service actually subscribe. It may be unreasonable to expect 100% participation, but it's not unreasonable to anticipate greater growth. And finally, states and the FCC continue to designate Lifeline-only prepaid wireless providers as eligible to receive Lifeline support. There are 2 such applications in the pipeline in Montana alone. I submit that the program continues to offer considerable financial incentives for prepaid wireless providers to enter the market. First, while the FCC has made it a priority to transform universal service to support broadband investment, they have waived the requirement that Lifeline providers make any investment in facilities at all. Senator Pryor has called for the elimination of support for what he calls these virtual networks. Second, The second financial incentive attracting prepaid wireless Lifeline-only providers to the program is found in the level of support that these providers receive. That is, prepaid wireless Lifeline-only providers receive $9.25 per subscriber, regardless of what it costs to provide service. Since these providers can offer their Lifeline service for free, it's reasonable to assume that $9.25 is more than enough to cover their costs. And by the way, there's nothing in the law that defines comparable rates as free. The Lifeline support mechanism, in my opinion, is similar to the identical support mechanism in the high-cost program. When the level of identical support for competitive carriers reached $1 billion, half the amount of the Lifeline program, the FCC froze high-cost identical support in 2008. And the Universal Service Reform Order released at the end of 2011, the FCC eliminated identical support altogether, saying that the level of support received under the mechanism, quote, bears no relation to the efficient cost of providing mobile service, unquote. I believe the same logic applies to the amount of support provided to prepaid wireless Lifeline-only providers in the Lifeline program. Thus, I suggest that the FCC could eliminate the Lifeline identical support mechanism. The FCC either could make Lifeline support cost-based for prepaid wireless providers, or it could establish a default benchmark level of $3 per subscriber. Providers could submit cost data to the FCC demonstrating why $3 is insufficient. A $3 benchmark could save the Lifeline program as much as $1 billion while serving the same number of qualified low-income consumers. Or, if the program were capped at today's level of around $2 billion, the Lifeline program would have room for considerable future growth in low-income subscribership and or expansion of the program to include broadband access. Thus, any further growth of the program would be curtailed without putting additional pressure on the contribution factor or jeopardizing the other goals of universal service. Thanks again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vice. We appreciate your comments and testimony. We'll now turn to Mr. Christopher Gutman-McCabe, who's Vice President, Regulatory Affairs, CTIA, the Wireless Association. Welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of CTIA, I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of today's conversation about the Lifeline program. Throughout its history, the Lifeline program has advanced the goal of ensuring that every American has access to telecommunications services, and the wireless industry plays an increasingly vital role in furthering that objective. Nearly 3 decades after its creation, and through an evolution shaped by Congress and FCC leaders from both parties, data demonstrates that Lifeline has been a critical component in the effort to expand telephone subscribership, particularly among those who live at or below the federal poverty level. But in spite of this progress, our work is not yet done. According to 2012 data from the Center for Disease Control, there are still several million American households that lack any phone service, something essential for full participation in the modern economy and the promotion of public safety. While the Lifeline program has played an important role in driving penetration, its growth during the recent recession has led some to question its value and caused what has traditionally been a program with broad bipartisan support to become politicized. This is unfortunate, and I would like to take a moment to clear up 2 common misconceptions that skewed discussions over the program. The first misconception about the Lifeline program is that it relies upon taxpayer funds. This idea has been repeated in the press and on talk radio with such frequency that it is simply accepted by many as true. It is not. The fact is that, like all universal service programs, Lifeline is funded through levies imposed on providers of interstate telecom services. Wireless companies, wireline companies, and VoIP providers contribute to the fund and generally recover those contributions from their end-user customers. Funds are remitted not to the U.S. Treasury, but rather to USAC, an independent organization established by the FCC to administer the 4 USF programs. Congress appropriates no money for the fund, and monies collected and distributed by USAC do not impact the federal budget, the deficit, or the debt in any way. Because of that, increasing or decreasing the size of the Lifeline program or any other component of the overall USF program will not have an impact on the federal budget. The second frequent misconception about the Lifeline program is that it provides free cell phones to people. Some have taken this untrue assertion so far as to claim that government is subsidizing iPhones or will soon be subsidizing low-income people with iPads. The reality is that some carriers provide a lower-end device to eligible consumers. Lifeline support is attached only to the service, not to the devices. I hope you don't take my pushback on these points as a suggestion that we don't take the efficient operation of the Lifeline program seriously, because we do. The fact is that wireless consumers provide nearly half the funds that are collected for USF, and thus CTI's members are very interested in ensuring that all USF programs are run efficiently and with full accountability. Because CTI is committed to the responsible stewardship of the Universal Service funds, we supported the FCC in its efforts to enact new Lifeline accountability measures. These reform measures include rules eliminating Lifeline support for more than one connection per household, a new monthly usage requirement, new standards for determining Lifeline eligibility, and new requirements for ETCs to review Lifeline subscribers' eligibility, something carriers previously were prohibited from doing. The FCC also committed to the creation of a database to prevent duplication of support across carriers in real time, as well as to create a nationwide eligibility database to ensure that only qualified consumers receive benefits. We look forward to the completion of these two efforts. Going forward, CTI believes that the most important step that can be taken to safeguard the program and prevent fraud is for the FCC's 2012 reforms to be fully implemented. This is particularly true with respect to the creation of the duplicate and eligibility databases, which must be completed as expeditiously as possible. Over the nearly 3 decades since its creation, the Lifeline program has served an important purpose and enjoyed bipartisan support. CTI is committed to working with the subcommittee and the Commission to advance this effort in a way that is technologically and competitively neutral and fiscally responsible. We believe this is a laudable and attainable goal. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
We appreciate your testimony as well. And for our final witness today, we'll go to Billy Jack Gregg, who's head of Billy Jack Gregg Universal Consulting. And we appreciate your testimony.
May it please the committee. As you've heard here this morning, there are two sides to the advent of prepaid wireless providers as part of Lifeline. On the one hand, prepaid wireless service has been the most successful measure ever adopted to expand Lifeline service to low-income consumers. On the other hand, prepaid wireless service has opened the door to numerous abuses and caused a rapid rise in the cost of the Lifeline program. Some states currently have Lifeline subscribers far in excess of the eligible number of households. At the same time, other states have seen a decline in Lifeline subscribers, even though the number of low-income households has risen. The first slide you're looking at today shows graphically the increase in the low-income fund since 2006. Prior to 2008, the line that you see went off to the left in almost a flat manner. But then beginning with 2009, with the advent of prepaid wireless service, we see the rapid escalation, almost a tripling to $2.2 billion. Virtually all of this increase has been caused by payments to prepaid wireless carriers. Now, currently, payments from the fund average 58% of its potential maximum size based on the number of low-income households in each state. However, Lifeline payments to the states vary widely. 6 states currently receive more in low-income support than the potential maximum indicated by the number of low-income households in those states. And these are shown as at the top of the slide. These states are Oklahoma, Maryland, Alaska, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Georgia. On the other end of the spectrum, the 6 states at the bottom of the slide currently receive only 10% or less of their potential support: Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Colorado, Hawaii, and Wyoming. The greatest increase in Lifeline subscribership has occurred in Maryland. In the third quarter of 2009, there were only 6,504 Lifeline subscribers in Maryland, representing only 2% of the eligible low-income households in that state. By the third quarter of 2012, the number of Lifeline subscribers in Maryland had risen almost 100-fold to 645,000. Moreover, the current number of Lifeline subscribers in Maryland is almost double the number of low-income households in the state. as shown by the graph. The dashed red line is the number of eligible low-income households. The blue line is the number of Lifeline subscribers by quarter. I would note, however, that in the last quarter shown, that the number of subscribers dropped by 100,000. This is the first quarter that the FCC's reforms took effect. We can expect to see a continuation of this trend as the quarters progress. In spite of the nationwide increase in Lifeline subscribers over the past 3 years, the number of subscribers in 11 states actually declined, with the largest drop occurring in California, traditionally one of the largest recipients of Lifeline support. Over the past 3 years, California has lost almost 500,000 Lifeline subscribers. At the same time, the number of low-income households in California has risen by over 400,000. Once again, you can see the dashed red line is the number of eligible households, the blue line, the number of Lifeline subscribers. The FCC decisively addressed numerous flaws in the low-income program in its 2012 Lifeline Reform Order. In order to build on the positive aspects of prepaid wireless Lifeline service, while at the same time guarding against further abuse of the system, the following additional measures should be adopted. 1, the low-income fund must operate within a budget like all the other constituent funds of the Universal Service Fund. 2, the overall budget for the low-income fund should be composed of caps on support to individual states. If demand in a particular state exceeds the cap, then payments to carriers in the state should be proportionally reduced to fit under the cap. 3rd, the FCC should conduct multiple pilot programs to determine whether a required minimum contribution from Lifeline recipients is appropriate, and if so, at what level. 4th, the FCC should explore ways to provide incentives for state involvement in providing Lifeline service to as many eligible customers as possible. 5th, the Lifeline subsidy should be portable, and recipients should receive the same level of subsidy regardless of the service they choose: landline, postpaid wireless, prepaid wireless, or broadband. And finally, federal and state governments should continue to promote participation by the low-income customers in the Lifeline program by removing barriers to participation and encouraging automatic enrollment. In order to continue the public policy success of the Universal Service Fund and the Low Income Fund, we must continue to support access, not excess. Thank you.
Mr. Gregg, thank you for your testimony and for the charts, graphs, and data behind them, and for your recommendations. We'll now, and I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony again. I'll start out with questions. Ms. Veach, in the Lifeline Reform Order, the Commission stated the reforms would put the Commission in a position to determine the appropriate budget for Lifeline in early 2013. Well, we're kind of into early 2013. We're about out of early 2013. What's the status on the budget? When will we see that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you say, when the Commission adopted the reforms in 2012, the Commission unanimously determined not to put a budget on the program until it had an opportunity to assess the impact of the reforms. Rather, the Commission adopted a savings target for 2012, which, as the Bureau reported, we exceeded. And at the same time, the Commission wanted to assess the reforms and also has sought further comment on what the optimal rate should be. So the specific timing of when the Commission will move to a budget is up to the Commissioners.
Is what? When?
It's up to the Commissioners.
So in other words, you don't know when we're going to see a budget.
We continue to assess the impact of the reforms.
I don't mean to be rude, but the order said early 2013. We kind of expect the FCC to follow its own timelines there. And so we'll keep pressing for that budget because I personally think that's important to have. Do you all, I just quickly down the other, on kind of a John Dingell yes or no answer, do you think it's important for the FCC to develop a budget in this area? Mr. Jones?
Yes. I think it's important to have a budget, but before we adopt a budget, this is a very technical and complex program, and I would urge the FCC to work with states that are reforming it. I think we proposed 15 ways. You
Yes, you
could
did.
prohibit activation of phones. You could cut them off at 75% benchmark for reactivation. There are ways, instead of a top-down approach, a bottoms-up approach that may work.
All right. Ms. Gonzalez, real briefly here on budget. Yes, no?
Yeah, yes, but I think first the FCC needs time to assess the reforms, and we wouldn't want it to set an arbitrary number that would cut anyone off from service.
Mr. Weiss?
I agree, yes.
Member McCabe?
I think, echoing some of the earlier points, we need to see what the status is of the reforms, and I don't think this is simple. I mean, I think when you look at what do you do with the next person who becomes unemployed, if you set a budget that limits the amount of support,
right,
you have a difficult decision to make.
Mr. Gregg?
Yes, the total maximum size of the non-tribal Lifeline Fund right now would be $2.9 billion if every eligible household received a year's worth of subsidy at $9.25. However, there's different ways you can cut that. You could establish a two-tiered system where the federal government would supply up to $2 billion of Tier 1 support, basic fundamental support, and then an additional $500 million if the states would match it. This would provide strong incentives for the states to pony up some money to help support Lifeline service. Currently, the reforms may have had the unintended impact of reducing incentives or creating counter-incentives for states to participate. In fact, Colorado just eliminated their Lifeline program about 3 weeks ago, in part because of the perception that the federal government is now paying the entire cost of the program.
So I want to ask perhaps you, Mr. Gregg, or Mr. Jones, about the $9.25 rate. Where does that come from? Is that evaluated on a regular basis? Is it an accurate rate?
The $9.25 is simply an average of what was paid out at the time the FCC adopted their reform order in 2012.
Okay.
It had been made up, and as people explained earlier, originally the Lifeline subsidy was to offset the subscriber line charge that was imposed when the Bell system was broken up in the early 80s. Then, whenever the Lifeline program was included in statute in the 96 Telecom Act, there were two additional tiers added. One was an additional $1.75 that was given to all states if they would guarantee it was passed through to customers, and then an additional $1.75 based on state matching. That is what has now gone away.
The market's changed so much since 96 and all. Competition, Mr. Jones, is $9.25 an appropriate rate?
Probably not. NARUC has no resolution on this point. I'll speak for myself. When TracFone became before us for a prepaid wireless ETC designation, my commissioner staff and I asked the TracFone people a lot of questions on what does it actually cost to provide this service. And they refused to give us any information. Why? Because under law we have no jurisdiction over wireless carriers, and the FCC rules do not permit a cost-based determination. So it kind of places states in a difficult position to decide whether or not it's cost-based or not. So the FCC just, as Billy Jack said, they did an averaging of the SLIC, the 625 plus.
Do you have any comment on this, Mr. Weiss?
I think Commissioner Jones summed it up there. We don't have the data, but it appears.
So we don't know whether 925's a lot, not enough, but boy, it sure seems like there are a lot of entrants in the non-facilities-based.
Well, just based on the evidence, I mean, we can have an argument about competition in a subsidy market, but this is true competition in a subsidy market, and I would conclude that the non-facilities-based ETCs are making a substantial margin on the service.
There's a fine line between competition and gluttony here, I think, so we have to watch for
Correct.
that. I'm going to turn now to my colleague from California, Ms. Eshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to ask for a unanimous consent request to submit for the record. We have a long list of support letters that we'd like to have entered into the record.
I believe we have them all here, and we will accede to that request.
Very, very much. Thank you to all of the witnesses. You've given us, I think, excellent testimony this morning. Now, I don't know if this was given to all of the members, but I think this, our respective staffs received this from the FCC. It's the Lifeline Reform Overview. And on page 8, it's very interesting because it starts with January 2012 and it goes to April of 2013. and this is the number of Lifeline subscribers in the millions. Starting in January of 12, it was 15.8. It peaked August 2012 to 18.2, and the graphs show that it continues to move down, and at the lowest rate right now in terms of Lifeline subscribers, it's 13.2 million. So this says to me that it's moving in the right direction. I mean, that the reforms are working. Now, I'm trying to figure out what the biggest problem is, most frankly. There are some wild allegations, full-page ads, pro and con, Obama phones. You know, I think what we need to stay away from, with all due respect, is simply a disdain for the president and then moving that to apply to policies in telecommunications. I mean, it just doesn't mix. That's like water and oil. It doesn't make sense. It's not dignified. I don't want to have anything to do with that. But what I do want to hear from the witnesses are the following things. To the FCC, this whole issue of a cap. What do you think of that? I do think that the chairman has raised a good point about the budget. When do you anticipate being able to not only assess the success of the reforms that the FCC is putting into place, so that you can then arrive at a budget? I don't know about this $9.25. Who has the authority to even dive into that? I mean, I'm hearing that Mr. Jones, that your organization can't. That's why you couldn't get an answer. Is it the FCC, or do we need to do oversight and bring people in and do it ourselves? I mean, I think that that's a legitimate question. I also, to Mr. Gutman-McCabe, as you know, I strongly support cell phone unlocking, so consumers can switch carriers while keeping their existing phones. Given that the Lifeline program only subsidizes service and not the device, I don't know how many members know this, but the government does not provide any device. It's most frankly, the wireless industry. I mean, everything is moving to wireless anything. That's why we're trying to find more spectrum to support all of this, that the wireless industry advertises, right?
Correct,
I mean,
yes.
You promote this. So
yes, Congresswoman. I mean,
I think that, you know, that such a policy would enable support dollars to go further and expand the use of the universe of phones that can be used with the program. So I'd like to know what you think of that. So maybe Ms. Gonzalez, you want to comment on CAP. So why don't we start with the FCC? Maybe Mr. Jones, you want to comment on the several items I raised, Ms. Gonzalez, and Mr. Gutman-McCabe. So why don't we go quickly? I've got 32 seconds, but I think the chairman will let you answer. But
thank you, Ranking Member.
Got it all in.
The issue of the cap is tied to the issue of what the optimal subsidy amount should be. The Commission is currently considering, after taking in public comment, the $9.25 rate, and has...
so you have the authority to review that rate, and if you think it needs to change, you have the authority to change it?
That's correct.
And when do you think you're going to complete that?
I can't speak as to when the commissioners
This year?
would vote on that. It's just not within my ability to say.
Can you get back to us on
that
it?
decision is highly relevant to what the budget for the program should be.
Can you get back to us on that?
I will do so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just quickly, NARUC does not have a position whether the 925 is appropriate or not. As I said, we operate through resolution. We have 2 resolutions on point. But speaking for myself, I think Julie hit the nail on the head. They do have the authority. It has to go to the 5 commissioners or 4 commissioners, whatever it's going to be right now with the chairman leaving. But the states could offer their help. As I said, we do. I think certain states have had better luck than we have in getting a composition of rates. And as Mr. Feist said, in Montana, certain states may help out. So this may be worthwhile to refer the issue to the joint board, again, on universal service to work out some of these details.
To the extent that a cap may cut eligible people off from service, it's a bad idea. And certainly right now when the FCC has not fully implemented the reforms.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, this is the only program that doesn't have a budget. And ironically, one could argue that the FCC actually did it right with Lifeline to implement reforms first, see how the reforms work, and then determine what the appropriate level of that program is. They have not done that with the other 3 programs. I wish they had, but they haven't. So it's probably time to consider a budget and work from there.
Thank you.
Congressman, I think it's fair to point out there has been a lot of discussion and debate about the provision of phones. The carriers subsidize the phones themselves, and I have 2 here, and I brought them just so people can look. These phones will not make you the envy of your friends and neighbors, okay? They're kind of circa 2000 at best. Hopefully you can't see who the manufacturers are so I don't get myself in trouble. But the reality is these are not the phones that get you advanced access to, to communications of the future. They're $19.95 at retail at most. They're designed to do exactly what the program was designed for, which is to get you access to basic telecommunications. So anyone wants to see them after, I'm happy to bring them to you. But you can see we're not talking iPhones, we're not talking iPads, we're talking basic service, and that is funded by the carriers who participate in the program.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, as you saw on the second slide, we need to work on both ends. We have some states that have more Lifeline subscribers than there actually are low-income households. Obviously, that subscribership has to come down. But we also have many more states that have fewer Lifeline subscribers than there are low-income households.
Yeah.
So we need to work on increasing participation there.
Thank you very much to all of you.
Okay, we'll now turn to the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you very much to our panel for being with us today. It's been very, very informative. And again, thank you for being here. Mr. Jones, if I could start with you, if I may. In your testimony, you listed a number of additional reforms that the NARUC members have suggested would improve the integrity of the Lifeline Fund, including consumer co-pays, a return to the requirement that carriers have their own facilities, reforms to the marketing practice of Lifeline carriers, and procedural requirements for carriers enrolling new Lifeline customers. Could you elaborate on those suggestions?
Thank you. Yes, I could. Again, NARUC operates by resolution. We do not have resolutions on point on these 15 recommendations that we made to you. We want it to be responsive. So these are ideas for your consideration, you and your staffs. But speaking for myself, I'll mention 3. The National Duplicate Database is really important to get up and going. I would encourage the subcommittee to have strong oversight on Ms. Veach's program. USAC announced this week that they were going to finish the duplicate database by the end of the year. Let's get it done. It was supposed to be done in February. We need to get that up and going. So the database development, and then you have the other database, the eligibility database. That's going to be more complex because the order, as you know, introduces 3 more benchmarks, including low-income energy assistance, to feed into this massive database for the initial eligibility. So it's very important to get that eligibility database up and going. The other thing I would urge them to do is rescind the blanket forbearance on the facilities requirement given to prepaid wireless carriers. This was done in 2005. The FCC could rescind that. If the subcommittee plays a useful role in providing oversight, that's something you could do. The other thing you could do is prohibit activation of a handset before the initial eligibility is done. It doesn't make sense to me, again, speaking personally, for a handset to be activated before either a state database or a national database is queried. You have the 4 last numbers of the social security number, or you have a subscriber ID. I mean, this is just kind of common sense business. and database, you should be able to develop a system to query, and if that person is a duplicate, you can get it at the front end and not activate the handset. Those are three.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Gutman McCabe, if I could turn to you. Senator Coburn brought to light some disturbing press coverage out in Oklahoma of people with multiple subsidized cell phones. I guess the question is, how widespread of abuse is this, and is the problem related to vendors who advertise free cell phones in low-income neighborhoods? And what is the industry doing, if anything, to combat that problem? And what is or could the FCC also be doing to curb that abuse?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. Well, first of all, I think at times people tend to conflate bad actors and MVNOs, people that don't have networks, and conflate MVNOs with bad actors. There are a lot of non-facilities-based carriers who are actually good actors, do a very good job with this program, as Mr. Gregg suggested, actually moved services out to people who otherwise wouldn't get them. The reality is there are some bad actors in this program, and one thing you'll hear from us, and you may hear me say it depending upon how many times I'm asked, is if we can have responsibility, efficiency, and accountability in this program, we're all for it. I mean, 100%. We think it needs to happen. There can't be states like Mr. Gregg suggests that have significantly above 100% participation above the poverty level. So for us, we want a program that is smart, intelligent, well-targeted, that allows for a range of technology-neutral participants. If companies decide that they want to subsidize a relatively inexpensive phone to allow the person to get access to it, I don't think that's much different than someone who gets a free landline phone as part of their landline service. So looking at wireless differently, I find it concerning because it's no different than, I don't pay for my landline phone in essence in my house, which I still happen to have. It seems to be I'm moving towards the minority. But we're here talking about potentially removing wireless from the program at the same time that all of us are reading articles about the overwhelming majority of people are beginning to move away from a landline phone. I just read this week that the landline phone is now the third most popular phone in the U.S. households, wireless being number one, VoIP being number two, and then landline. So there definitely are things that have to be rooted out. I would question the advertising of some of the companies and the marketing of some of the companies that are providing the service, but I don't think you can say that MVNO equals bad actor because there are a great deal of them that are very good actors and are really doing a positive thing with this program. And if you look at their subscribers, I mean, when 79% of your Lifeline subscribers have a household income below $15,000, I think you're targeting the right people. I think that's the good that this bipartisan program was designed for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his questions. We'll turn now to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to ask a quick question of Ms. Veach. Is there such a thing as a free government phone? Yes or no?
No, there is not.
Okay. Is it accurate to say that the Lifeline program is not contributing to any current growth within the USF fund at this point?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Goodman McCabe, I strongly believe that Lifeline should be reformed and modernized in a responsible manner, and it must account for America's ever reliance on the internet and innovation economy. 100 million Americans are still not adopted to broadband. And coupled with the fact that nearly 80% of available jobs are only accessed online on applications, and both need to be addressed. Do you support the concept of modernizing Lifeline to support broadband?
Congresswoman, I think, and I congratulate you, it's a conversation that we as a country, and particularly you as policymakers, have to have. I mean, the country is absolutely moving that direction. The reality, as I said a moment ago, is that if people aren't choosing wireless phones, they're choosing sort of VoIP or over-the-top phones with their broadband connection. We're seeing a movement in that way that makes absolute sense for us to have this discussion. And we're having it as part of the broader universal service program.
No, and that's good because I find it kind of interesting we're having this discussion about landlines and wireless, and as we all know that most of us have been moving to wireless for quite some time. And now we're also talking about broadband too, and everybody seems to want to do that, but you got to get there. And if we're stuck in the landline business, we won't get there to a great degree. I'd also like to ask you, too, a study by the Telecommunications Policy Institute found that 59 cents of every dollar spent from the USF high-cost fund goes to the carrier recipient's overhead and administrative expenses. That is, only 41 cents out of every rural USF subsidy dollar goes to building rural networks. But Lifeline offers a discount on the monthly price of service. 100% of every Lifeline subsidy dollar goes to reducing a low-income consumer's monthly phone bill. So, given these differences, wouldn't you say that Lifeline is already the far more efficient of the two programs, and that we should devote as much attention to reducing waste, fraud, and abuse in the subsidies we pay to carriers as we are in the subsidies paid to low-income consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's those are key points to focus on. I think that gets lost at times, but the Lifeline subsidy goes directly to the consumer to offset their bill. You know, Mr. Feist talked a little bit about cost-based support and things like that. The FCC has argued against sort of a race to the top, against a race to say, here are my costs, and I should have, you know, some return above that. I know, you know, several of the panelists suggest that we also should be looking at the high-cost fund because of the fact that not all of those dollars are rationally and intelligently spent. I think you hit a key point, which is the Lifeline program. It's means-tested. It's designed to target exactly to the people who need it, people who, you know, we're talking household incomes in the mid to low, you know, teens, in the thousands of dollars. And it's a one-to-one offset. I mean, every dollar that goes in offsets the cost that they otherwise would pay.
Well, thank you very much. And I compliment the FCC on the reforms that have been taking place. And I guess the last 8 months and the reduction of, I guess, about $5 million. And these reforms are taking place, and I think it's timely we do this hearing. On the other hand, I believe we need more time to really figure out the real impact of this. And I also understand, too, that it goes beyond this to a great degree because it's very uneven. We have states that are maybe oversubscribed and other states that, you know, are not at all at a point where we're reaching everyone. And so, to me, this needs to be looked at and studied to a degree that we've not done yet. My goal is to ensure that every American that qualifies gets access to whatever three things, especially with my bill, that they're able to landline, wireless, broadband, choose. But we're not going to make any progress if we get stuck on things like caps for Lifeline, because Lifeline is a different situation than I believe even the high-cost fund. And I'm not denigrating high-cost fund at all. But I believe that we're looking at something where we want to expand access in a reasonable manner. And we want to make sure we have accountability there. So I ask each of you, if you're agreed upon that, the Lifeline needs to be expanded in a reasonable way so we capture more of the qualified households and not get into a fight about whether or not they're doing the right thing or not. Are you all agreed that we need Lifeline?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Yes, and we should focus on the customer rather than the carriers. That's why we should have a straight subsidy, whatever the level is, and let the customer apply it to the service that they choose that meets their needs. In that way, their choices will drive the market.
Okay, you all agreed on that one?
Yeah, I think Mr. Gregg's conclusion, access versus excess, was well said.
Congresswoman,
Okay.
just with the proper accountability in place.
I understand.
We have some strong concerns about the high-cost fund being at $4.5 billion. We think that's appropriate, too.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
It's all right.
Thank you.
Good to get the answers. We'll turn now to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great hearing. I like the terminology access, not excess. I think a lot of us will use that. Mr. Gregg, thank you for that. I actually appreciated the minorities handing me the letters and all this documentation. I did go to one comment from Illinois. It said, make it more efficient, don't drop it. There's a reason it's called Lifeline. So that's where we need to go. But I don't think you all understand the anger that's out there in America over this. I live right next to St. Louis, Missouri, so Senator McCaskill's responding to this anger of a free phone. And to say it's not a free phone is not accurate. It is a free phone. Someone gets a phone, and they get minutes, and they don't get billed, for the most part. And in this day and age, people really have a hard time understanding it. So you all are supporters of this. You're doing a terrible job of marketing it because you have lost the public opinion war on this. And we can't, and it's tough to get the genie back in the bottle. And actually, that's why I appreciate the minority for asking for the hearing. This is part of that educational process, but you all got a long way to go. And for Ranking Member Waxman to say no one uses Obama phone, he doesn't go to the web. There's obamaphone.net. Answers a lot of these questions accurately on who's qualified and who's that, but that's how you pull it up. You got the Obama phone rap out there, and you can just Google it, and that leads to this frustration and anger about people getting free phones, and the free phones they're receiving it based upon ratepayers, right? People are paying rates. We're all paying. People get phones. My first question to Mr. Gutman McCabe, and I'm a friend of the industry, you know that. Can you tell me how many people have one of these free phones, but then use their 250 minutes, go in and pay for more minutes?
I don't know the answer to that, Congressman. I think I can see if we can track that down and get back to you. I don't.
Some of my friends were not willing to provide us that information, but let me pose a question. If they get a free phone and then they can go in and pay for doubling of the minutes, does that pose a question of whether they should have a free phone or not?
Well, so I think if you go back and you look at and the commission has put in some of these some of these measures, I think
should part of the measures be, are they purchasing more minutes?
Well, I think the measure should be, do you satisfy some threshold to qualify? And so if the threshold
let me ask another question to your industry. What incentive is there for the industry to do due diligence on qualifications to receive an Obama phone?
Well, in the past, not only was there not, I won't say there was not incentive, we weren't allowed to do eligibility requirements.
And that's a problem.
It was self-certification.
Right.
But in 2010, we pushed for this. So this is not something that came about on its own. This is something we fully endorsed and strongly believe and continue to push the commission for an eligibility database and a duplicates database. Because I agree with you, we're not winning the PR discussion. It's about having something that's efficient and accountable, and yet still works.
Let me give you the exact thing. We're going to have issues with young new staffers here in Washington, D.C., and we're going to get to offer them, because of the income qualifications, they'll be able to qualify for a free phone based upon how some of us compensate our employees and our staff. And Medicaid. What a great benefit package to come to work in Washington with that venue. Ms. Veach, the final question that I have is, there is discussion about expanding this to broadband. Do you know what percentage of current Lifeline subscribers already have broadband service?
Congressman, we don't track individual subscribers, so I don't have that data.
Okay, and I think we'd probably try to look forward to see if you can then provide that at some time, especially as we move in this debate. And with that, I yield back my time.
Now turn to a gentleman from New Mexico, I believe, Mr. Lujan.
Mr. Chairman,
you're up next.
Thank you very much. And I don't know how many of you have been to obamaphone.net, but here it is. And obamaphone.net looks like it's a nice website. nice colors. I like the color blue, and it's in here quite a bit. And it has this great picture of President Obama up on top. But when you start scrolling down, it says sign up now. So it says the Obama Phone Government Benefit Program. And when I see this notion that says sign up now, I would think as a consumer that if I'm on this website and I click there that I'm signing up now for a phone. But if you scroll down to the bottom of this website, and I'm glad I have good eyesight because it's really small, it says ObamaPhone.net is an independently owned and operated website that is in no way affiliated with the United States government, departments within the federal government, or any state or local jurisdiction located inherently therein. And then it kind of runs away because I guess the footnote is not needed as much as the rest of the propaganda on this website. And so I wonder if it's fraudulent or not for us to put on a website that appears to be a federal website telling consumers they can sign up for a Lifeline phone, collecting information that's in no way affiliated with the federal government. As opposed to encouraging people to go to this website, I'd encourage you to go look at it so you never go to it again, so that we can get through this. That's part of what the FCC is trying to do. We're trying to crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse here. And we shouldn't direct people into areas that are purported to maybe sign up for a website, that are probably signing up for sharing their consumer information in one way or another. I tried to get to the privacy notice on the site, but I couldn't find it. I guess I'm not savvy enough. But I was able to get to that disclaimer at the bottom. So I just think, Mr. Chairman, that as we talk about these sites and what's happening here, that we agree that there's important programs across the federal government that are needed. I come from a rural state. This has been purported to be a program that's abused in only urban parts or needed in urban parts of the United States. I think that there's some letters that have been submitted, and Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit 2 letters from 2 rural organizations, the National Grange on the Order of Patrons of Husbandry and Rural Broadband. And in it, Mr. Chairman, one of the letters cites that Lifeline is an essential to the success of our country because it ensures that even the most unserved areas are safe, able to communicate, and included. Simply put, any cuts to Lifeline will leave rural, tribal, and low-income communities more vulnerable and locked out of full participation. And I also have 2 letters from 2 tribes, Gila River Telecoms and Mescalero Apache Telecom Incorporated, that I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit it to the record.
Leave those were part of the majority or minorities packet.
Oh,
It's already
wonderful.
been submitted. We went through that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I thank Ms. Eshu for her wisdom as well for her submission. So thank you and the staff very much, Ms. Eshu. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I want to have a few questions to Mr. Jones, and I appreciate you being here, Mr. Jones, having been a former member of NARUC myself when I was fortunate to be part of the New Mexico Regulatory Commission, which is the equivalent of utility commissions across the country. You stated in your testimony that the ability of some states to audit and or investigate waste, fraud, and abuse may be hampered by rules or laws limiting or altogether removing states' authority over wireless companies. Could you explain how that could be the case? And with the concerns in some states, what can NARUC do to help ensure that states will adopt stronger policies in those areas where maybe we see rules that aren't as strong?
Congressman, that mainly refers to many state statutes across the country. Largely, I think, with Mr. Gutman McCabe's companies that have gone and lobbied state legislatures to prohibit PUCs from regulating or having anything to do with wireless service. The laws are written a little bit differently, but it makes it very difficult for state PUCs to have jurisdiction over things like E911, TRS, high-cost funds, or universal service. So that prevents us, and also 214E, Section 214E, that governs eligible telecommunications carriers. That's the federal statute that we operate under. It's written very broadly, and it doesn't specify the type of technology. So this has been the subject of litigation in many states where some of the wireless carriers push back on us. What can we do? We can work with, I think the best thing we can do is work with Ms. Veach and her colleagues at the FCC through the joint board process, where we deal with these difficult issues. They have better access to information on cost and all sorts of things than we do. And in that confidential setting of the joint board process, I think we can get at some of these issues.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I know my time's expired. I have some other questions I'll submit to the record. I was so compelled with the Obamaphone.net, Mr. Chairman, that I had to use a little bit of my time to talk about that wonderful website. Thank you very much.
Appreciate the gentleman's questions and comments. We'll now turn to Mr. Terry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Feist, at least in the state of Nebraska over the last couple years, we've seen now 51 different Lifeline providers apply with our PUC in Nebraska. Are you seeing the same explosion of I'm putting fictional quote marks on competitiveness and competition in Montana?
Congressman Terry, we have 2 pending applications for Lifeline-only prepaid wireless support.
2?
Right.
And Nebraska has 51 over the last couple years. Huh.
Only 2.
That's interesting. Mr. Jones, is NARUC seeing that level of explosion? And this builds, the next part of that question is, how do we determine what the appropriate price line is? Because if there's 51 carriers coming into Nebraska to get their $9.25 per phone, there's a hell of an incentive going on.
Right. We have designated 6 wireless ETCs for support with the wireline, and I think we have, I'm going to up the ante that Mr. Feist had. I think we have 8 or 10 pending before our staff right now. So we've designated 6. On the wireline side, we have many more wireline carriers. But to put this in perspective, of the eligible low-income households in the state of Washington, even with that support, we are only reaching 33% of the low-income people in our state. That's Lifeline, wireless, everything together. So as Billy Jack said, if we want to get to 50, 60%, if that's a valid social goal, to have people connected for these valuable services, we have a long ways to go. But obviously it costs money. What can we do to get at the cost? It's really with the FCC, I think. The FCC has the ability to determine if the $9.25 per month is appropriate or not.
So, Ms. Veach, how do you reply?
Congressman, on the question of the $9.25 rate, we've sought public comment on that question and are looking at the record, and will continue to conduct an open proceeding to put the commissioners in a position to determine what the optimal rate
In
would be.
a public comment process, will you be able to obtain the true cost of providing this service?
I think there are different types of services. As we've heard, there are wireless services as well as landline services.
All right, so for the variety of services, are you going to be able, in a public comment setting, obtain cost information?
In addition to the record that's already developed, if necessary, the Commission can ask for more data if it needs it from Mr. Gutman-McCabe's members or others.
So is that a yes, that you're obtaining that information through the public comment?
We've invited comment. I'd be happy to work with your office to let you know whether we have obtained the kind of information you're asking about already or need to ask for it.
Is there a red flag with the FCC that there's that many competitors coming into what used to be just a few years ago a very limited market? Does that raise a red flag?
Well, absolutely. In our reforms, we required that before any non-facilities-based carrier could be designated to receive support, it first had to have a compliance plan approved with the Commission, and we've only approved 20 of those since the reforms went out. The next step then is to approach the relevant state PUC to seek designation.
Okay. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Now recognize gentleman from Illinois, my friend Mr. Rush, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been quite a hearing, and I'm not surprised. I want to congratulate the ranking member for bringing this issue to the fore. But as I sit here and hear some of the questions and some of the commentary, really infuriates me about some of the attitudes and opinions and some of the remarks that I've heard. I'm trying to maintain my cool, so to speak. But first of all, Mr. Chairman, there are some letters that I would like to enter into the record, and some of them may be included, but I'm told that in your package, but I'm told that they aren't included, and we have a statement from the NAACP, the Leadership Council on Civil Rights and Human Rights, the United Church of Christ, the National Organization for Women, the Asian American Justice Center, Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, and from the CWA, and I like those included in the record.
Without objection.
All right. Mr. Chairman, and I want to ask, maybe Ms. Beach or anybody can answer this question. Was there any noticeable uptick in the Lifeline Services program during and immediately after Hurricane Katrina?
Congressman, as a matter of fact, it was during the time of recovery from Hurricane Katrina when the Commission permitted wireless providers to enter the program to provide vital services to the consumers affected.
Well, this notion of this service or these phones being called an Obama phone, what do you think is the rationale behind that? Because if you're going to call it in any kind of non-political, non-classless, and I might say the non-racist way, then it certainly should be called the Bush-Obama phone. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, you're absolutely correct that a lot of the expansion of the program that happened without proper oversight was during prior administrations. The reforms that the FCC has put in place in the last 3-4 years will ensure that only eligible subscribers can participate and that there are appropriate checks in place on the consumers as well as the carriers.
Well, let's look at who uses Lifeline. It's certainly not just members of citizens in urban centers. This program supports older Americans. One carrier reported that 47% of its users are 50 years old and 16% are over 60. Now, I know, because that's my age category, I like music, but I'm not too far into rap music. So for this service to be characterized as being or associated with something called Obama rap, what do you think about that?
As you say, the service is available without regard to any demographic characteristics, seniors, the elderly, disabled, rural as well as urban, based on income rates or participation in another federal assistance program. It's available in all 50 states.
Let me ask, I see my time is winding down and I have a lot of other questions along this line, but is there any of the witnesses at the table, are you aware of any increase in mobile phones in Afghanistan?
No, sir, I'm not.
I can't answer that question.
I was at a meeting earlier today with an expert, and there is an increase in mobile phone use in Afghanistan. And my understanding that it is federally subsidized. to a great extent, it's federally subsidized. So our taxpayer dollars are going to Afghanistan to increase mobile phone usage in Afghanistan. But here we are making much, and some of it legitimate, much ado about possibly job seekers. 26% of users reported by one carrier are unemployed, and 62% are employed on only a part-time basis. 52% of the subscribers are Caucasian, 30% are African American, and 10% are Hispanic. I mean, we're making much ado about something that that's been a fairly good program. The subject of this hearing is the Lifeline Fund, money well spent, with a question mark. My answer to that is yes, it's well spent. Maybe some problems, but I think the FCC is moving to address the problem. I think they should be commended. But whether this program should be capped, no, it should not be capped, especially when the unemployment, when the number of poor people in this country is on a dramatic increase. Then why would we try to cap this particular program? Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I just want to, I don't like the message that's emanating from this hearing, and I think it's offensive to the best interest of the American people. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman's comment. We appreciate his comments. We're just trying to get to the truth and the answers, and that's why it's a bipartisan hearing. So I appreciate your participation. We'll now go to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you having this hearing. It's a very important hearing to have, dealing with a program that's had a history of fraud and waste and abuse. And this program is the kind of program that really angers, I know, a lot of my constituents, and I'm far from alone when I talk to colleagues of mine from all across the country, whether you want to call it an Obama phone or a free cell phone or whatever it is. It's a program that the federal government has set up that taxes.
What about a Bush Obama phone?
Whatever you want to call it.
Regular order,
it's
please.
It's a free phone to some people that's paid for by other people. And those other people that are paying for that service, when they see the fraud and abuse and the waste in this program, get incredibly angry. And to discount that anger of hardworking taxpayers who are seeing their cell phone bills go up, knowing that some of that money is being used to pay for somebody else to get free cell phones, in many cases in violation of the law itself, they have a right to be angry. And their anger is very justified when they look at the dramatic increase over the last few years of the cost of this program. And I want to ask you, Ms. Veach, because it's being considered by some, and there's legislation filed to expand this into broadband, I think that should tell you that if they filed a bill to expand it into broadband, it means that the law shouldn't currently allow you to provide broadband services for free to some people at a cost to other people. If they're filing a bill to try to make that legal, yet in your own testimony you talk about a pilot program that y'all have already started, to extend it to broadband. Under what legal authority, first of all, with all the fraud, waste, and abuse in the existing program, what legal authority do you have to actually broaden it even more? And whether you want to call it an Obama pad or a Bush pad or whatever you want to call it, you're already expanding this program into an area that the law doesn't say you can expand it to. And in fact, when our colleagues on the other side file a bill to do this, they're implying that you don't have the legal authority to do it today. Where is that legal authority coming from?
Thank you, Congressman. As you say, we have taken a small piece of the savings from the other reforms.
How much?
$14 million to initiate a broadband pilot that will inform us by testing different technologies, different types of speeds and so forth to see what we can do to
Under
increase.
what, you tell me what you're doing. What legal authority do you have to do it? $14 million of money that should be in the pockets of hardworking taxpayers to lower their cell phone bill. You know, and this is where we get to the, you know, the overall abuse of the program, but also the overall public opinion of the program, because there, you know, in Louisiana, a family of four making $35,000 a year is paying for this. They can't get the free phone. You know, this is a family who made a decision, you know, if they've got their own cell phone, and let's say they've got broadband at their house, they're paying for that with after-tax dollars that they worked really hard for, and they made tough decisions. They might not go out to eat one night because they've got that's an important priority that they've set, and it angers them when now they're paying somebody else's free cell phone bill, and then you've identified waste, fraud, and abuse that this committee had oversight on, and it's been identified by many people. We're trying to clean up the fraud and abuse. I'm co-sponsor. I'm not a co-sponsor directly, but supportive of legislation by Representative Griffin. I think there are other bills that would actually go back to the original intent and say no more free cell phones. But they're looking at this and they're saying, I'm paying for this. And if instead of saying, oh, okay, we found waste, fraud, and abuse, what the government should be doing is saying that money, every quarter you assess the companies that ultimately taxpayers pay the bill, you assess them. Every quarter you could lower their cell phone bill by the amount of money that you found in waste, fraud, and abuse that we directed you to go find in waste, fraud, and abuse. Instead, you've taken it upon yourself to take that money and not lower the cell phone bill for that family of four in Louisiana making $35,000 a year. They'd like to see their bill lowered. They're struggling in tough times, but for whatever reason, you decided as a bureaucrat that you're just going to go and create a new program that you're not even legally authorized to create to spend that money instead of letting them have that money back in their pocket. So I would hope when you're trying to think of what to do with the money that you're finally uncovering from waste, fraud, and abuse, you don't see it as some kind of honeypot that you can go and spend somewhere else. That's money that ought to be in those hardworking taxpayers' pockets, not the government to spend on something else, but finally give them a break. Give the folks that are paying the freight a break so that they don't have to pay as much, and maybe they can go out to eat one night with their family of four instead of having to fund somebody's free broadband and free cell phones and all this other stuff that they're irritated about. And the final thing is I would ask you to get us the list, because it's been asked before, get us the list of the number of people that are in this Lifeline program that have free cell phones that actually pay out of their pocket to upgrade it. For whatever reason, they've got enough money to upgrade it. Maybe they should be paying for their own phone, not having the government pay for it, not having that taxpayer pay for it. But will you get the committee the count of how many people that are in the program actually pay to upgrade their service? Can you get us that?
We will work with your office to provide what we can, yes.
We'd like you to get us that count of how many people actually do that. And I appreciate the chairman's discretion. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. I believe all the members have had an opportunity to ask at least the first round of questions. We're not going to do a second round, but there may be other questions for the record we'd like you to address, and we may need to probe deeper into this issue from different angles, perhaps at a future hearing. Yes, I'd recognize the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like unanimous consent to place into the record the following. It is it's a listing of the 2012 top 10 high-cost disbursements by states, and it also lists out the 2012 top 10 lifetime disbursements by states.
Without objection.
I just wanted to point out to the gentleman that in Louisiana, there's 110,927. Now these are what? 110,927, and that's an overage. Is that an overage? That's how much more the state gets. So, but I think that this is instructive. So, thank you for allowing us to place it in the record.
And Mr. Long has returned, so we'll turn to 5 minutes of questioning for Mr. Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Start with Billy Jack Gregg, if I can. On the slide that you showed earlier, the red line going across on Maryland, was that at the poverty line?
That was the number of low-income households. Households at 135% of the federal poverty guidelines or below.
So that was at the 135%
right.
level. And your graph showed that there's a considerable number of people that are getting these phones that are above that income level, correct?
Right. For the most recent data, the total number of low-income households in Maryland was about 304,000. The number of Lifeline subscribers was 654,000, so over double.
And my understanding, go to Ms. Veach now, my understanding is that the FCC does not use that data. Is that correct? Or were you aware of that figure, that so many more people above that should not be qualified to get this phone are actually getting it?
Congressman, I have seen the information that Mr. Gregg provided, and we have also taken actions to ensure that only customers who are eligible to sign up and only one customer per household will be able to sign up. And we have, in fact, notified consumers when we've identified that they have duplicate phones, that they're in violation of the rules, and next time could be fined by the FCC for that violation. We're also standing up a database to prevent that from happening again, and in the meantime, we'll continue to scrub the rules.
Staying with you, Ms. Veach, what percentage of users go over their free 200 minutes on their phones?
I don't have that, Mr. Congressman.
Could you get that and get back to us with that?
Work with your office to provide what we can, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And that takes out the second part of my question then. Ms. Veach, again, what percentage of the eligible population are Lifeline recipients?
It's a complex estimate because you can be eligible either based on your income or by participation in another federal program. We estimate that it's about a third of households.
About a third of the eligible households
That's right.
are receiving this phone. What, on this 200 minutes that they get, if someone has their own personal cell phone and they have one of these phones we're talking about here today, and they forward their personal phone to their, whatever you want to call it, Lifeline phone we'll call it, and first use up their minutes there, do you know, have you looked into any of that or heard of any of that happening?
I have not, but we take all allegations about abuse in the program very seriously, and I'd be happy to check with my team and get back to you on that.
If you would, I'd appreciate it, because I have heard of that very thing. A congresswoman related to me yesterday that one of her constituents related to her that that's what she was doing with her phone, was forwarding, and I'm trying to check with some of the providers to see if that would even save money or not. Would that not use the minutes on their personal phone, anyone on the panel?
Congressman, I would suggest each state does this differently. I know that when we designated ETCs, some were at 200, 250, 300 minutes. We had the 800 number issue to deal with. If that would count when you call an 800 number, does that count toward the minutes? We decided no. I would urge you to talk to Chairman Kenney of your Missouri Public Service Commission, because they have designated these ETCs, and Chairman Kenney and the staff of the Missouri Commission can share with you the terms and conditions of all these ETCs.
Okay. And Ms. Gonzalez, going to you on, you said, I believe, that 15,000 people at 15,000 per year and under make up a third of the users of these phones. Is that correct?
Under $15,000 a year make up the majority, I think about 80%, according to one provider. All the providers provide different.
What I had in my notes here that I wrote down as you were speaking earlier was that I thought you said a third were under 15, a third were over 65, and a third were disabled.
No, please let me clarify. Nearly 80%, according to one provider, make under $15,000 a year. Nearly a third are over the age of 55, and over a third are disabled.
Okay. And Mr. Gutman-McCabe, you said that these are not taxpayer funds that pay for these phones. So clarify again, who is paying for these phones?
Sure. They come from the consumer, and they go to USAC. So the carriers are given a percentage that they must pay, a number that they must pay. That money
is that not passed on to their customers?
It is passed on, but it's not there's not a budget line for it. It's not a debt or deficit number. It doesn't touch the U.S.
So it doesn't
Treasury.
show up in the 42% more than we're spending in this country right now than we take in every year. It's not in that figure.
It's not in that figure.
But it is.
Okay. But it is taken out of the economy.
It's
from the people that.
It's on
although
the bill.
also put back into the economy.
I'm sorry?
It's on your bill, though.
It's on your bill.
As
It's
a
paid
consumer.
by the consumer, but it's not a tax. It doesn't touch the Treasury.
Yeah, but it's not a voluntary thing on your bill. The customer has to pay that if they want to keep their phone going.
They do.
So that money's coming out of the economy.
Yes, although arguably going back into the economy is part of the companies that are hiring and paying employees. So it's almost circular in a sense. But it's not a budget line. It's not a debt or deficit issue. It's not targeted to any budgetary implication.
Okay, but I am very concerned to see Mr. Gregg's figures for your benefit, Ms. Veach, where you have such a huge percentage of the people in the state of Maryland right next door here that have these phones that, unless his figures are inaccurate, are not eligible to receive the phones because they make way above the 135% above the poverty level. So I would hope that somehow you all could take what you're not doing now, take this information from Mr. Gregg and research that. And if you'll get back to me with those questions that I asked you earlier that you said you'd get to me, I appreciate it. And again, thank you all very much for being here. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. I think that wraps up our hearing. We appreciate, again, the testimony you've given, the information you've shared with us, the answers to our questions. I'm sure there will be additional questions that we may have back for you, maybe in a bipartisan way as well. So again, thank you for your participation today, and our hearing is adjourned.